I'm back with another chapter for you. I had to give myself a little bit of an extra break in sharing because this chapter takes a lot out of my voice. Also, make sure that if you like these read-alouds, that you take some time after this is all over to patronize a local bookstore. Maybe stop by Alexander Books or stop by Ann Books 2 and see if you can pick up a copy of something that you've enjoyed listening to. They're both really great stores, and these are really good books. All right, and this chapter is called The Blood Bottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you in there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the Blood Bottler!" But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snozzcumber was lying near her, and she ducked behind it. The creature was clumping into the cave, and he stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I is jabbling to myself." "Fizzle fizz!" shouted the Blood Bottler. "Bug swallop! You is talking to a human being. That is what I is thinking." No, said the BFG. Yes, boomed the Blood Bottler. "I is guessing you have snitched away a human being and brought it back here as a pet. Now I is winking it out and guzzling it for extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one in here," he stammered. "Why don't you leave me alone?" The Blood Bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scum screwer," he shouted. "Piffling little swish figgler. Prunty little prog swizzler. I is now going to search the primroses," instead of premises. He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being." The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off edge of the enormous snozzcumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The Blood Bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy-looking, and the eyes were just tiny black holes. The nose small, but the mouth huge. It spread right across his face, almost from ear to ear. And it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between those two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down his chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate people, men, women, and children every night. The Blood Bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," said the BFG. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is dotty as a dog swoggler," cried the Blood Bottler. Soon the Blood Bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break her leg. The snozzcumber, although it was thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the Blood Bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozcumber large enough for her to crouch in, so long as she rolled herself into a ball. She crawled into it. It was wet and slimy of a hiding place, but what did it matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The blood bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed the half-eaten snozcumber. The BFG stared at the empty table. "Sophie, where is you?" he thought desperately. "You cannot possibly be jumping off a high table, so where is you hiding, Sophie?" "So this filthing, rotsome glubbage is what you was eating," boomed the blood bottler, holding the partially eaten snozcumber. "You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash." For a moment, the blood bottler seems to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. "That is the scrum-diddly-umptious snozcumber," he said. "I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a snozcumber?" "Human beans is juicier," the blood bottler said. "He was talking rummy-tot," the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of that repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. "I is happy to let you sample it," the BFG went on, "but please, when you see how truly glumptuous it is, please do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper." The blood bottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snozcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. "You is not switch-fiddling me, is you?" said the blood bottler. "Never!" cried the BFG passionately. "Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting, 'Oh, how scrum-diddly-umptious this wonder veg is!'" The BFG could see the greedy blood bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. "Vegetables is very good for you," he went on. "It is not healthsome always to be eating meaty things." "Just this once," the blood bottler said. "I is going to be tasting this rotsome eats of yours. But I is warning you, if it is filthsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy little head." He picked up the snozcumber. He began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, "Don't!" but that would have been even more certain of a death. Crouching among slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly, there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit a huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly, at least. "Yeah!" roared the blood bottler. "Ugh! Yeah!" And then he spat. All the great lumps of snozcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she most certainly would have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall, and she dropped to the ground, half-stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. "You little swine buggler!" roared the blood bottler. "You little pig swiller!" He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. "You was not loving it?" the BFG asked innocently. "Loving it!" yelled the blood bottler. "That is the most disgusterous taste that has ever touching my teeth. You must be buggles to be swalloping slush like that. Every night you should be galloping off happy as a hamburger, golloping human beings." "Eating human beings is wrong and evil," said the BFG. "It is guzzly and glumptuous," shouted the blood bottler, "and tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble a few chili beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile?" "I is not wishing to know anything," the BFG said, very dignified. "I is choosing Chile because I is fed up with the taste of Esquimos." This was written before we used the word Inuit. "It is important I has plenty of cold eats in this scuttling hot weather, and the next coldest thing is a chili bean. Human beings from Chile is very chilly." "Horrible," said the BFG. "You ought to be ashamed." "Other giants is saying they want to gallop off to England tonight for school children. I is very fond of English school chidlers. They has a nice inky book flavor. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them." "You is disgusting," the BFG said. "And you is an insult to giant peoples," shouted the blood bottler. "You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squinky squiddler, a cream puffnut." With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. "Sophie," he whispered. "Sophie, where is you, Sophie?" Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. "I'm here," she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. "Oh, I is so happy to be finding you all in one lump," he said. "I was in his mouth," Sophie said. "You was what?" the BFG cried. Sophie told him what had happened. "And here I was telling him to eat that filthsome snozcumber, and all the time you was inside it?" the BFG cried. "Not much fun," Sophie said. "Just look at you, poor little chidler," cried the BFG. "You is all covered in snozcumber and giant spit." He went about cleaning her up as best he could. "I is hating those giants more than ever now," he said. "You know what I should like?" "What?" Sophie asked. "I should like to be finding a way of disappearing them, every single one." "I'd be glad to help you," Sophie said. "Let me see if I can think up a way of doing it." And that is the end of the Blood Bottler chapter. Good night, everybody.